So first of all, I am not a gardener. This is not a gardening channel, and you didn't come here to learn about gardening. But all that being said, we figured, you know what, we're just going to give you a tour of our garden because it's going to take up a lot of our time and energy this year like it has in the past. And it seemed like maybe, even if it wasn't that interesting to some of you, there would certainly be some percentage of those who watch this channel who could teach me a lot about either what I'm doing right, what I could do better, or what I'm doing completely wrong. So have a look over my shoulder and we'll talk about what we're trying here at Wadsworth Village to grow some vegetables this year. So if you think of this garden like a pie chart, I've got about 50% of the space committed to corn, maybe 30% of the space committed to tomatoes, and 20% to whatever else is left over. In our crop selection around here, tomatoes are the most valuable player. I mean, we love tomatoes. My dad, since the time he was a kid, had sort of an obsession with tomatoes, and we love them. Dad used to plant 70 tomato plants here. Now, he didn't spend much time weeding or mulching or anything, but boy, he put the plants in the ground, and so you would, of course, get a few tomatoes. We're down to, I think, 42 tomato plants this year, and they are heavily mulched, they're fertilized, and they produce a lot of fruit. I don't know much about gardening, but I heard enough people talking about mulch as being important that I started looking around, and I figured out that the city of Roseburg would drop off mountains of leaves in the fall if I had a place to receive them. And I do.
Faster, faster!
So I think 3 years ago they dropped off maybe 800 yards of leaves that had been run through a chipper. And now they're all composted down, and it's beautiful mulch that has been tilled in 1 or 2 years, and then I put it on as a top dressing about 8 or 10 inches thick in between the plants. It works beautifully for weeding. I mean, it turns your weeding into pretty much just mopping the floor, right? I mean, the weeds don't have a chance of hanging on when they're just in that leaf duff. The downside, and there is a downside, is that there are some bags of trash in what the city grinds up and collects every year. And so there are zillions of little pieces of trash scattered through the mulch in my garden. But the silver lining to that is I can hire my grandkids at 25 cents a piece to pick up these little bits of trash, and they think they're making some money, and I'm getting my garden picked up, and they are excited to come out and work in the garden for the first 15 minutes anyway. So watering, we have a water right onto a little stream that's on the property, and so we can pump out of that. That makes it nice, I mean affordable. For the first half of the summer, or 30% of the summer, most of the watering happens with these homemade rainbird contraptions. They work pretty good. But in the tomato patch, once the tomatoes get up and there's a lot of blossoms trying to set on, and you don't want to get a bunch of fungus and moisture hanging onto the plants, I made this little device, which you'll see in operation later in the summer probably. But it just pressures up, and I've got it drilled to correspond to the layout of the tomato plants, which is on a 4-foot by 5-foot grid. So it just sort of sprinkles directly over to the base of the tomato plant. You can let it run there for an hour or two, really soak them up, and then jump a row and move over. So we sprinkle from the top the potatoes and the beans and the broccoli and the cauliflower and the zucchini. What good is zucchini anyhow? But that is pretty much all sprinkled from the top. And then once the tomatoes are up just a little further, they'll all be wet kind of from a drip irrigation system on steroids. You might have already seen this thing on my Instagram feed if you're following me there, but that's a corn planting jig that I had to brainstorm about a month ago, I think. You just put this alongside the string, push those little ears down in the ground, give it a wiggle, jump over, center up one of the ears in the last hole, and voila, you get your holes to line and spaced and to grade, maybe. And it makes a nice even corn row when the grandkids can sustain that attention span long enough to get corn seeds in each one of those little bitty holes, which kind of petered out down on that end of the patch, but that's all right. We're not too worried about the corn, and we are intensely focused on the grandkids. So these old window panes were in this house, like for 80 years before I swapped them out a few years ago. And I couldn't bring myself to throw them away. I used a couple of them in the chicken house. You may have seen that, but you know, this is not technically a greenhouse, right? But it's we're just putting our toe in the water on all this, and probably in a few years we'll have a reasonable little greenhouse here for starting seeds and seedlings and different crops to experiment with. But for now, works pretty good. So you know that tomatoes are the main event. I mean, we've got 42 plants. That's a lot of tomatoes. But we eat them fresh, we can them. My wife turns them into tomato juice. We give a lot away. They are a wonderful high-value crop, right? But perhaps the most, no, I won't say the most. One of the real high-value ways that we use tomatoes is in a chili sauce that Kelly makes. Now, I know that we are not a gardening channel and we're not a cooking channel, but boy, she makes a good chili sauce. And if you were interested in any of this, essentially tomato jam, we can talk about that on the second channel. I mean, a lot of this kind of stuff ends up there. But anyhow, summer's coming. In fact, it is summer now. These things are growing. But I have a question. In as much as I'm not a gardener, I'm worried about whether or not I can continue to put tons and tons of decomposed leaves onto this garden, plow it in, and just keep doing that, or if I'll get the soil all way out of whack. I don't know enough about no-till agriculture to figure out how to just poke the holes and put the seeds in and have them like it. So I'm open to your input on this. I could stand a little guidance as I do my gardener impersonation, but it's nice. We like it. We like what it does for our people and for the people around us. So thanks for watching. And in this case, keep up the good gardening work.